Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
It's great that you got promoted. Mom and my sister are moving in with us permanently. Now you'll have to support everyone, said her unemployed husband, heading out to get the relatives. When they arrived, they were stunned by what they saw. But before we continue, let me know what the weather is like where you are, if you've subscribed to the channel, and if you've liked the video. Enjoy the listening. The metallic sound of the lockpick in the keyhole sounded like music to Isabelle. The man, dressed in a Serrageria Rapida uniform, worked focused and silently, only occasionally throwing her sympathetic glances. Isabelle stood leaning against the doorframe, nervously fiddling with the edge of her burgundy cashmere cardigan, a gift she had given herself a week ago for her birthday. 37 years old, the age of Christ plus 5, as she used to joke about herself. Now, there was no room for jokes. "Don't worry too much," said the locksmith suddenly, without looking up from his work. "Locks can be fixed." "Broken? We replace it." "Not the first time, nor the last." Isabelle smiled faintly, unable to explain that the problem wasn't the broken lock. Sometimes, people break more deeply than mechanisms, and they have to be repaired in more radical ways. "Is this a reliable model?" she asked to distract herself from thoughts about what was going to happen in a few hours. "German, with 3 layers of protection," the locksmith said, turning a shiny cylinder with a key in his hands as if showing off a product. "You can't pick it, not with a bump key either. Without the original key or a grinder, you won't get in." "Does he have a grinder?" Isabelle thought, imagining how Andreas, in a suit worth 100,000 pesetas, might try to cut the door with power tools. The image was so absurd that she couldn't help but chuckle quietly. "Here are the 4 keys, as you ordered." The locksmith handed her a set of identical keys, gleaming with protective stickers. "Do you want to try?" Isabelle nodded and took the keys. Their cold weight in her palm felt like something final. A point of no return. 5 years of marriage, crossed out by 4 metal pieces. Turning the key in the new lock, she felt something inside her release, a taut spring that had been tightening more and more over the last 2 months. The mechanism worked flawlessly, smoothly, without the slightest resistance. Symbolic, Isabelle thought. Locks had always played a special role in her life. When the locksmith left, taking the old lock cylinder and leaving a bill, Isabelle walked into the living room of her 3-room apartment. The spacious room with high ceilings and friezes from the era of Francoist Spain looked unusually deserted. She had removed some things, those that belonged to Andreas, packed them into suitcases and sports bags, which now stood by the front door, waiting for their owner. Isabelle walked up to the window, looking at the snow-covered courtyard of the old Madrid building in the Chambéry district. In 5 years of marriage, this was her first truly independent decision. And she already knew that the consequences would be painful for everyone involved in this story. "I should warn the porter," a practical thought crossed her mind. She took her phone and called downstairs. "Don Pablo, hello. There's a situation." Isabelle hesitated for a moment, choosing her words. "If my husband comes back today, not alone but with his mother and sister, please don't let them into the apartment. He no longer lives here. His things are by the door. Let him take them. But don't let them in, please." "Understood, Mrs. Isabella." The elderly porter's voice showed no surprise or condemnation. "You can be at ease." How many of these stories has he seen in his life? Isabelle thought, hanging up. In old buildings in central Madrid, porters often worked for decades, becoming silent witnesses to human dramas and comedies. She slowly sank into an armchair, staring at the wall where their wedding photo had once hung. Now there was only a pale rectangle on the wallpaper, an imprint of a happy past that, as it seemed to her now, was just an illusion. Isabelle looked at the clock, antique, floor-standing, which had come with the apartment from her grandmother. Its steady ticking had always calmed her. Now it showed 3 o'clock. Andreas was supposed to return by 6, and not alone. After his morning words, she had only a few hours to make a decision and put it into action. "How great that you got promoted. Mom and my sister are moving in with us permanently." Now you'll have to support everyone. These words, casually thrown at her during breakfast, still rang in her ears. Not congratulations, not I'm proud of you, not you deserve this promotion. Just a statement of fact. Now you'll be supporting not just me but also my mother and sister. Isabelle closed her eyes, remembering how it all started. How she, a girl from a military family raised in strictness and discipline, ended up married to a man who, at 38, considered it normal to live off his wife. Isabelle Victoria Montero was born into the family of an Air Force lieutenant colonel and an English teacher. From childhood, she had been used to order, discipline, and responsibility, qualities her father considered the foundation of character. Life has no rehearsals, Isabelita, he used to say when she complained about his strict demands. Every day is a performance. Either you're ready for it or you failed. Their small family had moved around military bases in Castile, then Andalusia, and later the outskirts of Madrid. New schools, new friends, new rules. All this taught her to adapt quickly and not get too attached to people or places. At each school, she was an excellent student, but her father always said, "No es el lugar lo que honra al hombre, sino el hombre al lugar." It's not the place that honors the man, but the man that honors the place. When Isabelle was 16, they finally settled in Madrid. Her father had been promoted, and her mother took a job at a prestigious language high school. For the young girl, the capital seemed like another planet, bright, noisy, unfriendly. No one cared that she was the top student in her class. Here, there were other rules, and she desperately tried to understand them. The class she entered had been formed years earlier. Children from wealthy families had already formed cliques and clans, and breaking into this closed society wasn't easy. But Isabelle didn't give up. She remembered her father's words, "Los Montero no se rinden ante las dificultades." And she stubbornly sought her place under the Madrid sun. Her studies became her salvation. Isabelle immersed herself in her subjects, especially English, which she knew better than most of her peers, thanks to her mother. Her class teacher, Doña Concepcion, noticed this and offered her to help the struggling students. That's how she made her first friend in the new school, Margarita Reina, the daughter of a well-known Madrid lawyer, a beauty, the life of the party, but a hopeless failure in English. "You're not the usual type of top student," Rita told her after a few lessons. "Not boring at all, and you dress decently." "What do top students usually look like?" Isabelle smiled. "Well, you know, with glasses and braids and grandma's sweaters." They laughed, and from that moment, a friendship began that would change Isabelle's life. Rita introduced her to the right people, taught her to dress according to Madrid's fashion, and not to be ashamed of her provincial past. "You have beautiful eyes," Rita said when they were shopping together. "And a great figure. You just don't know how to show it off. Look." Rita's lessons paid off. By graduation, Isabelle had transformed from an ugly duckling into a swan, a slim brunette with attentive gray eyes. She no longer looked out of place in the city or the school. Teachers predicted she would win a gold medal and have a brilliant future, but fate was preparing the first serious lesson, which would forever change her attitude towards people and life itself. A new student, Carrillo Serrano, had transferred to their school, a diplomat's son who had returned with his parents from a long-term assignment in Argentina. Tall, with an olive tan and dark curly hair. He instantly became the center of attention for all the girls in the class, but his gaze stopped on Isabelle. "You're not like the others," he told her one day after class. "You have depth." Isabelle fell in love the way only a 17-year-old can, desperately, without looking back, forgetting everything in the world. Carrillo wasn't just handsome. He was interesting, read serious books, was interested in philosophy, dreamed of becoming a journalist and traveling the world. With him, she felt special, chosen. "You two are like two halves of one whole," Rita said to them. "It's nauseating, really." But there was no envy in her words, only genuine happiness for her friend. At least, that's what Isabelle thought. When graduation exams came, she and Carrillo made grand plans to attend the same university, rent an apartment together, and maybe, later, work abroad. For the first time in her life, Isabelle thought not about what her parents expected of her, but about what she herself wanted. And that was an intoxicating feeling of freedom. She passed the entrance exams brilliantly, received a gold medal, and got an interview for a scholarship spot at the prestigious Universidad Complutense, where Carrillo also planned to study. The future seemed clear and beautiful, and then everything changed. The graduation night was held at one of Madrid's trendy clubs. Isabelle wore a specially bought electric blue dress that highlighted her gray eyes, making them almost look blue. Carrillo couldn't take his eyes off her, and that filled her with pride. The evening was magical. Congratulations, dancing, champagne, plans for the future. After the formal part, the disco started. At some point, Isabelle lost track of Carrillo, but didn't think much of it. He might have gone outside for a smoke or to talk to some classmates. But when he hadn't returned for over an hour, she started to get worried. His phone wasn't answering. "Have you seen Carrillo?" she asked Rita, who was dancing with a former 10th grader. "No," her friend replied with a strange smile. "Maybe he stepped outside?" Isabelle decided to check. She walked around the club, peeked outside, but Carrillo was nowhere to be found. Growing more anxious, she went up to the top floor where the VIP rooms were. One door was slightly open, and strange sounds came from inside. What she saw when she looked inside changed her forever. Carrillo and Rita, her best friend, and her boyfriend, were kissing passionately on the couch, oblivious to everything around them. His hand was under her dress, and she was quietly moaning. "I've wanted you since the first day I transferred to your school," Carrillo muttered between kisses. Isabelle was just a cover. She didn't listen any further. Quietly closing the door, Isabelle went downstairs, grabbed her purse, and called a taxi. She returned home with dry eyes. The tears would come later. At that moment, all she felt was the deafening sense of betrayal and the humiliating realization of her own naivety. Her father found her on the balcony at 4 a.m. She was sitting with her knees hugged to her chest, gazing at the dawn over sleeping Madrid. "¿Qué ha pasado, hija?" he asked, sitting beside her. And then Isabelle told him everything, without crying, without complaining, just stating the facts, like a report on a failed operation. Her father listened silently, without interrupting. When she finished, he placed his large hand on hers. "You know, in aviation, there's a concept called turbulence zone," he said thoughtfully. "The plane shakes. It seems like it's about to fall apart. But if the pilot knows his job and doesn't panic, he always brings the plane back to calm skies. Right now, you're in such a zone. You've been betrayed, and it hurts. But you're stronger than this pain, Isabelita. You'll get through it, and you'll become stronger." "I won't trust anyone again, Dad," she said quietly. "Don't say nonsense," he smiled softly. "People need to be trusted. Just not everyone, and not in everything. Confia, pero verifica, old rule, but it works every time. And remember, only those you trust can betray you. If you don't trust, they won't betray." These words deeply affected her and became the foundation of her future life philosophy. She didn't call Carrillo or Rita back. She deleted their numbers and blocked them on social media. She started fresh. She enrolled at Universidad Complutense, but not in the international journalism faculty where Carrillo had planned to study, but in the international tourism faculty. On the first day of classes, she was pleased to see that neither Carrillo nor Rita were among the freshmen. Later, she learned that Carrillo had failed the entrance exams and went to another university. Rita had moved to London to study. Her father paid for her to attend a prestigious college. Isabelle threw herself into her studies. She eagerly absorbed knowledge, participated in conferences, and won student work competitions. In her third year, she was invited to intern at a large tourism company, where she performed so well that they offered her a permanent position after graduation. Personal life took a back seat during these years. There were dates, there were brief romances, but Isabelle never let anyone get too close to her heart. She focused on her career, on self-improvement, on becoming independent and self-sufficient. By the age of 26, she was already the head of a department at the same tourism company where she had started as an intern. She had her own small studio apartment in a residential area of Madrid, bought with a mortgage, and a stable income that allowed her not only to support herself but also to help her parents, who had by then retired. Then, another event happened in her life that changed everything. Her grandmother, Alexandra Pavla Montero, passed away and left her an apartment in central Madrid. Alexandra Pavla Montero was a legend in their family. A cardiologist, she had worked her entire life at Hospital de la Paz, treating high-ranking officials and receiving a spacious 3-room apartment in an old building near Retiro Park as a reward for her service. Isabelle had never been particularly close to her grandmother. She was known for being strict and unsentimental. But it was to her that Montero sent his daughter when her father was assigned to Madrid. Isabelle spent her first year of city life under her grandmother's wing while her parents settled in. Alexandra Pavlo wasn't the sweet, cookie-baking grandmother from fairy tales. She didn't knit socks or make pastries. But she taught her granddaughter the most important thing: independence and the ability to make decisions. A woman must always have her place on this earth, she would say, showing Isabelle old photographs of their home. And her own purpose in life. Only then will she never depend on anyone's mercy. Alexandra Pavla became a widow early. Isabelle's grandfather died in a car accident when her father was only 12. But she didn't break, she didn't give up, she raised her son, built a career, and earned the respect of her colleagues and patients. When her grandmother died of a stroke, Isabelle was at an international tourism fair in Milan. She flew back for the funeral in shock and numbness. Death had always seemed so distant and abstract, but now it suddenly intruded on her life so abruptly and mercilessly. After the funeral, her father invited her into his office and handed her an envelope. "This is for you from Grandma," he said quietly. In the family, they always referred to their grandmother simply as Abuela. She had left a will. Inside the envelope was a short letter written in a clear, almost medical handwriting. "Dear Isabella, if you're reading this letter, then I am no longer here. Don't grieve too much. I lived a long and, I dare say, a worthy life. I have always kept an eye on your progress and am proud of you. You are a true Montero, strong, intelligent, determined. I know you will achieve great things in life. I bequeath you my apartment on Calle de Arenal. This is not just property, it is the history of our family. Here, the best years of my life were spent. Your father grew up here. Once, you lived here too. I hope that in these walls, you will be happy. You will build a family, raise children. But remember, this is your home, and only you decide who crosses its threshold. The most important thing is to stay true to yourself and never let anyone dictate how you should live. With love, your grandmother Alejandra." Isabelle read the letter with tears in her eyes. She never thought that her grandmother was so attentively watching her life, so proud of her, and, most of all, she hadn't expected such a generous inheritance. "Abuela wanted the apartment to stay in the family," her father explained. "Your mother and I are getting older, and we no longer need such a large place. Also, she always singled you out among the grandchildren, saying you were the most like her in character." Thus, at the age of 27, Isabelle became the owner of a spacious apartment in one of the most prestigious areas of Madrid. At first, she was even afraid to move in. The pain of loss was still too fresh, and her grandmother's voice seemed too vivid in those rooms. But gradually, she began to settle into the new space, making cosmetic repairs while preserving the historical details of the interior, the ceiling moldings, oak flooring, and antique door handles. She updated the furniture, leaving only a few things from her grandmother: an oak bookshelf, floor-standing clock, and a small redwood writing desk. The special place in the apartment was the grandmother's library, hundreds of volumes on medicine, history, philosophy, and classical literature. Isabelle couldn't bring herself to throw anything away, even though some editions were obviously outdated. It felt like part of Alexandra Pavla's soul lived in those books. The move to the center changed not just Isabelle's lifestyle but her self-perception. She became more confident, more independent. With the new address, her circle of neighbors expanded. There were successful businessmen, doctors, lawyers, and professors. Isabelle felt for the first time that she was part of Madrid's elite, not by privilege or money, but by right of inheritance. During this period, she formulated a life philosophy that she adhered to until she met Andreas. Her main principle was to maintain financial, emotional, and domestic independence. Nadie debe tener poder sobre ti, she often repeated the phrase she heard from her grandmother. The second principle was quality in everything, in work, in relationships, in the things she surrounded herself with. Isabelle preferred to have less but better. This applied to clothes, technology, food, and especially the people in her circle. The third pillar of her worldview was responsibility for her choices. Si has decidido algo, assume las consecuencias, she would tell herself in difficult moments. This helped her avoid blaming others and complaining about circumstances. Isabelle made a dizzying career in the tourism business. By the time she was 30, she became the development director at an international company that organized elite tours worldwide. She spoke perfect English, good Portuguese, and had some knowledge of Italian. She traveled a lot, met interesting people, and lived life to the fullest. Yet, sometimes, when she returned to her empty apartment after another business trip, she felt a strange emptiness inside. She had people to talk to spend time with, to share a bed with, but there was no one with whom she wanted to simply be in silence, without playing any roles or trying to impress. Ser demasiado exigent, she wondered, looking at her reflection in the mirror. At 31, she was still attractively slim, with good posture, expressive gray eyes, and well-defined features. Not a covergirl beauty, but definitely an interesting woman. Men noticed her, but relationships rarely went beyond a few dates. Some were put off by her independence, others by her successful career, and others by her reluctance to play the usual gender games. She wasn't a feminist in the aggressive sense of the word, she simply didn't see the point in pretending to be weaker or dumber than she was. When I find him, I'll know immediately, she said to her friend Natalia when she was trying to introduce her to yet another promising candidate. Isabelle believed that true feelings don't require effort or strategies. They either arise or they don't. And she was sure she would meet someone with whom she'd want to share her life. They met by chance, as is often the case in fateful stories. Isabelle was returning from a business trip to Barcelona, where she had been negotiating with owners of small family hotels on the Costa Brava. The flight was delayed by 3 hours due to a strike by Spanish air traffic controllers, and she was passing the time in the business lounge at El Prat Airport, checking her email on her laptop. At the next table sat a middle-aged man in a perfect gray suit. He was speaking on the phone in Spanish, and Isabelle couldn't help but overhear the conversation. "No, Dona Carmen, I can't fly earlier," he was explaining to someone, irritation in his voice. "There's a strike here." "Yes, I understand you're waiting." "No, I can't take a taxi to Madrid. It's 500 kilometers. His interlocutor seemed to not understand the logistical difficulties, and the man grew more anxious. Isabelle smiled sympathetically when their gazes accidentally met. "Mom, I have to go," he said finally. "I'll call you when I have news about the flight." He hung up and rubbed his brow tiredly. "Tough conversation?" Isabelle asked, feeling an unusual courage. On business trips, she often became more open than she was in Madrid. "Parents," he replied shortly. "They never believe you can't control the whole world, especially Mom." He smiled, and his face transformed. The wrinkles of fatigue smoothed out, and his brown eyes sparkled with warmth. It was a charming, almost boyish smile, which didn't quite fit his businesslike appearance. "Andreas," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Isabella," she responded with a handshake. That was how their romance began. 3 hours in the airport passed unnoticed, with them talking about everything under the sun: travel, work, books, films. It turned out they had a lot in common. They both loved jazz, preferred active leisure over the beach, and read the same authors. Andres was 5 years older than Isabelle. He told her he was building his own business, which focused on implementing IT solutions for the tourism industry. This immediately resonated with Isabelle. She was looking for new technological solutions for her company. When the boarding for their flight was announced, they exchanged phone numbers. Isabelle was sure that would be the end of it. A fleeting airport acquaintance, pleasant but without continuation. But Andres called her the next day after arriving in Madrid. "Isabella, do you remember you mentioned problems with online bookings in your company? I have some ideas that could help you. Maybe we can discuss them over dinner?" She agreed. Why not? A business dinner with a potential partner, nothing personal. But when she saw Andres in the restaurant, wearing a dark blue jacket with a bouquet of white lilies, how did he know they were her favorite flowers? She realized this wasn't just a business meeting. Andres turned out to be gallant, attentive, and a great conversationalist. He listened as though every word she said mattered, asked questions that showed his genuine interest not only in her professional life, but also in her as a person. After dinner, they walked around Madrid for a long time, and Isabelle found herself thinking that she hadn't felt this easy with a man in a long time. "You're different," Andres said, walking her home. "Most women your age only talk about marriage and children. But you talk about business strategies, travel, books." Disappointed, she asked, challenging him. Quite the opposite, he smiled his boyish smile. Delighted. At the entrance to her building, he didn't insist on a cup of coffee, he simply kissed her hand and said he hoped to see her again. This completely won Isabelle over. No pressure, no expectations, just respect for her personal space. Their romance developed rapidly. A week after their first date, Andres invited her to a jazz concert. Then they spent the weekend together in Toledo. Next was a visit to the Prado Museum. Each meeting revealed new facets of his personality. He turned out to be erudite, with a good sense of humor, passionate about his work. Isabelle allowed herself to relax and trust in the relationship. For the first time in a long time, she felt she had met a man with whom she didn't need to pretend or adjust. They were equals, two successful, self-sufficient people who had chosen to be together. Andres spoke about his business with such enthusiasm that it was impossible not to catch his belief in its success. He was developing an app for the tourism industry that was supposed to revolutionize the way travelers interact with local services. Imagine, you arrive in a new city, and through an app, you can book a tour with a local, reserve a table at a restaurant where locals eat, not tourists. You can learn about events that aren't in the standard travel guides, he said, his eyes shining. No tourist traps, no overpricing, just authentic experiences. The idea seemed promising, and Isabelle even suggested testing the app on her company's clients once it was ready. Andres was grateful for her support and belief in his project. 2 months after meeting, Andres confessed that he was in love with her. This happened during a walk in Retiro Park, not far from her house. It was a warm September evening. The trees were starting to turn yellow, and the air smelled like autumn. "I never believed in love at first sight," he said, stopping by the pond. "I thought it was just a fantasy of romantic women, but when I saw you at the airport, something clicked inside me, as if I'd met the person I'd been searching for my whole life without realizing it." Isabelle felt tears well up in her eyes. She wasn't a sentimental woman, but his words touched some deep part of her soul. "I'd never felt anything like this before," she confessed quietly. "With you, it's different. I don't have to play roles, pretend. I can be myself, and that's enough." He hugged her, and they stood there for a long time, gazing at the dark water of the pond, where the lights were reflected. That evening, Andres stayed over for the first time. Their relationship seemed perfect. Not only did they love each other, but they also shared interests, values, and life goals. Both were ambitious in their careers, both valued independence, and both preferred quality over quantity in all aspects of life. Only one circumstance slightly clouded their idyll. Andres lived with his mother. He explained this by his care for the elderly woman, who had been widowed many years ago and had grown accustomed to relying on her son. "My father died when I was 16, he told her. Since then, my mom and I have always been together. She sacrificed everything for me, her career, her personal life. I can't just leave her alone. Isabelle understood his feelings, but still, this situation made her uneasy. She wanted their relationship to progress further, to live together, to wake up in the same bed not just on weekends but every day. "Why don't you move in with me?" she suggested one day. "My apartment is spacious enough for two." Andres hesitated. "You understand, my mom, she's very attached to me. I'm not sure she'll handle being on her own." "But she's 80, isn't she?" Isabelle replied gently. "And you won't be living at opposite ends of the city. You can visit her as often as you want." Eventually, Andres agreed to talk to his mother about the possibility of moving out. But this conversation kept being postponed, and their relationship continued in the same format, together on weekends and occasionally on weekdays when Andres could break free. 4 months after meeting, Andres introduced Isabelle to his family, his mother, Carmen Dolores, and his younger sister, Valeria. Dinner was held at the Moreno family apartment, a traditional building in the Malasana district with a view of Dos de Mayo Square. Carmen Dolores turned out to be a stately woman in her 60s, with chestnut-colored hair and attentive dark eyes. She greeted Isabelle with a marked politeness, but without much warmth. "Andres has spoken a lot about you," she said, giving Isabelle an assessing look. "He says you're a very special businesswoman." There was a barely perceptible irony in her voice that made Isabelle uncomfortable. But she decided to ignore it. The first meeting with a partner's mother is always stressful, especially when the son is as close to her as Andres was to his. Valeria, Andres' sister, turned out to be the complete opposite of her brother. While he was composed, organized, and goal-oriented, she gave the impression of being a perpetual student, even though she was already in her 30s. An undefined job in the arts, a bohemian look, and a habit of dramatizing small things, all of this made Isabelle cautious, but she decided not to judge hastily. During dinner, Carmen Dolores asked Isabelle about her work, future plans, and family. The questions were polite but had a subtle undertone. It felt as though she was looking for weak points, vulnerabilities. "And how do you plan to balance a career and family, a lady as busy as you?" she asked, pouring tea. "Andres has always dreamed of having a big family, hasn't he, son?" Andres, who had been proudly talking about Isabelle's professional achievements, suddenly became embarrassed. "Mom, we haven't talked about that yet," he said, avoiding Isabelle's gaze. "But how not, son?" Carmen Dolores was surprised. "You always said you wanted 3 children, like it's a tradition in our family." Isabelle felt awkward. They really hadn't discussed children. It seemed to her that it was still too early for that. Moreover, she wasn't sure she wanted a big family, especially considering her career ambitions. "I think modern women manage perfectly well balancing career and motherhood," she diplomatically replied. "But we'll discuss concrete plans with Andres in private when the time comes." Carmen Dolores pursed her lips, clearly displeased with the response. Valeria, who had been silent until then, suddenly perked up. "Is it true that you inherited the apartment from your grandmother?" she asked with undisguised interest. "Andres says you have an amazing apartment near Retiro." "Yes," Isabelle confirmed. "My grandmother was a cardiologist at Hospital de La Paz. She received this apartment as a reward for her work." "What luck some people have," Valeria remarked. "We could never afford a place in the center. After Dad passed away, Mom had to sell our old apartment and buy this smaller one." "Valeria," Carmen Dolores scolded her. "Don't say nonsense. We have a wonderful apartment, and we are very comfortable here." But the look she gave Isabelle carried a barely concealed envy. Isabelle was unpleasantly surprised. She never boasted about her position and believed that material wealth wasn't the most important thing in life. After dinner, when she and Andres were taking a taxi to her place, Isabelle couldn't shake the feeling that the meeting hadn't gone as smoothly as she had hoped. "Your mom doesn't seem very enthusiastic about me," she cautiously remarked. "What are you talking about?" Andres took her hand. "She's just worried about me." You're the first woman I've introduced to the family in many years. Let her get used to the idea that her son has grown up and wants to start his own family." Isabelle nodded, although her inner voice told her that the problem was deeper, but she pushed those thoughts away. After all, she was in love with Andreas, not with his mother or sister. Their relationship continued to develop, but the question of living together remained unresolved. Andreas regularly stayed with Isabelle on weekends, sometimes for a few days a week, but he still wasn't ready to move in permanently, citing either his mother or the need to be closer to the office. Isabelle began to feel a vague sense of unease. It seemed to her that there was some hidden issue in their relationship, something unspoken and unresolved. But when she tried to discuss it with Andreas, he made jokes or redirected the conversation to other topics. Then, 7 months after meeting, he proposed to her. It happened during their trip to Venice. The romantic city, narrow streets, gondolas, bridges over canals, an ideal place for confessions and vows. They were walking in Piazza San Marco, feeding pigeons, and admiring the majestic cathedral. Suddenly, Andreas knelt in the middle of the square in front of dozens of tourists and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "Isabella Victoria Montero," he said solemnly. "I love you, and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Isabelle froze in astonishment. She hadn't expected a proposal, at least not so soon. They had been together for less than a year, still getting to know each other, still not having resolved the issue of living together. But looking into his eyes, full of hope and love, she couldn't say no. After all, she really loved him, really saw a future with him. And all problems could be solved together if there was mutual love and respect. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "Yes, I will marry you." Andreas slid the ring, with a small but flawless diamond, onto her finger, stood up, and hugged her tightly. The tourists around them clapped. Someone even shouted, "Congratulations." "I'll make you happy," Andreas whispered in her ear. "I promise." At that moment, she believed him without a doubt. Back in Madrid, they announced their engagement. Isabelle's parents reacted calmly. Her father thought a year of dating before marriage was the minimum, and her mother worried that her daughter was rushing into the decision. But seeing Isabelle's happiness, they didn't object, only asking not to rush the wedding. Andres' family's reaction was more complex. Carmen Dolores, upon hearing about the engagement, pursed her lips and said, "Well, if you're sure, son. I hope Isabella understands the responsibility she is taking on." "What responsibility, Mom?" Andres frowned. "We just want to be together." "What do you mean?" Carmen Dolores was surprised. "You will be the head of the family. You need solid support. And I'm not young anymore. I need support too. We've always been one family, and I hope Isabella understands that." Isabelle felt a chill run down her spine. There was an unmistakable implication in her future mother-in-law's words that after the wedding, they would have to care for her. Valeria, Andres' sister, responded with enthusiasm, but with a hint of something else. "How exciting! So, you'll be living in that beautiful apartment by Retiro. Great! Maybe I can get a room there too?" "I'm joking," she quickly added, noticing Isabelle's expression. But Isabelle understood that it wasn't entirely a joke. They decided to have the wedding 2 months after the engagement, a modest ceremony without extravagant celebrations, with only close family and friends. Isabelle insisted on this, and Andres agreed. Although Carmen Dolores hinted that her only son could have been married in a more grandiose fashion. A week before the wedding, they finally discussed where they would live after the ceremony. "I think it would be logical for you to move in with me," Isabelle said. "I have a 3-room apartment in the center. It will be convenient for us." Andres hesitated. "I also think so, but..." He faltered. "Mom will be upset if I completely leave her." "Andres," Isabelle said gently, taking his hand. "You're 36 years old. You're an adult man, getting married and starting your own family. It's normal to live separately from your mom." "I know," he sighed. It's just that Mom hasn't been feeling well lately. Stress, her heart. I'm afraid to leave her alone. And Valeria? She lives with her. Valeria, he hesitated again. She's not very reliable in daily matters. And besides, she often goes to exhibitions and festivals. Mom can't rely on her. Isabelle felt a growing irritation but tried not to show it. Well, she said calmly. Let's do this. After the wedding, you move in with me, but we'll visit your mom regularly. If she gets worse, we'll think about hiring a caregiver or a nurse. Andreas nodded with relief. Thanks for understanding. You're the best. Isabelle smiled. But inside, there remained an unpleasant feeling that the problem with his family was just beginning. The wedding went exactly as they had planned. Intimate, elegant, without unnecessary pomp. Isabelle wore a simple white dress by a Spanish designer. Andreas wore a classic dark blue suit. Instead of a traditional banquet, they had dinner at a small restaurant with 20 guests. Carmen Dolores attended the event in a rich wine-colored dress with large gold jewelry and an elaborate hairstyle. She clearly wanted to overshadow the bride, but Isabelle found it amusing. She was too happy that day to care about such details. Isabelle's parents remained dignified, but without arrogance. Her father, Victor Alexander, now completely gray but still a fit military man, gave a toast that moved everyone present. For your love, my children. May it be as strong as steel and as gentle as the first spring flower. May you always be each other's support in joy and sorrow, in wealth and poverty, and may you never forget why you gave each other these vows today. Isabelle's mother, Elena Sergio, an elegant woman with the insightful eyes of her daughter, was quietly crying as she looked at the happy newlyweds. Meanwhile, Carmen Dolores, after her third glass of champagne, suddenly exclaimed loudly, "Well, Isabella, when will you make us grandparents?" Andreas dreamed so much of having children. This blunt question, asked in front of all the guests, made Isabelle tense up. She and Andreas had only briefly discussed the topic of children and had agreed that the first year or two after the wedding would be for themselves, and then they would think about expanding the family. Everything in its time, Dona Carmen, Isabelle diplomatically replied. First, we need to settle in, get used to each other. But what's there to get used to? Her mother-in-law waved her hand. Live like all normal people, and everything will be fine. The most important thing is that the husband is the head of the family, and the wife is the neck. These young people today invent experiments, equality, I don't know what. Isabelle felt Andreas stiffen next to her. She expected him to react to his mother's words, but he stayed silent, only tightening his grip on her hand. After the wedding, everyday family life began. Andreas moved in with Isabelle, as they had agreed. At first, everything was perfect. They enjoyed each other's company, settled into their daily routine, and planned their future together. Andreas worked on his project, and Isabelle continued to manage the department at the tourism company. But gradually, the idol started to crack. Carmen Dolores called her son several times a day, complaining about her health, the neighbors, or the utilities. Andreas became nervous, often rushing to his mother's side in the middle of the workday or a family dinner. Sorry, darling, but Mom says her heart hurts a lot, he explained, pulling on his jacket. I have to check if she's okay. Isabelle didn't object. After all, caring for parents is natural. But when such emergency calls started happening several times a week, she began to worry. The situation worsened when Valeria, Andreas' sister, announced that she was going to India for 6 months to find herself. I'll take care of Mom, Andreas finished the sentence, looking at Isabelle. She'll move in with us while Valeria is in India. Temporarily, of course. That's when their real family trial began. Carmen Dolores' temporary move turned into 3 long months. During this time, Isabelle felt like a guest in her own apartment. Her mother-in-law rearranged the kitchen to her liking, criticized Isabelle's style of clothing, her cooking skills, and her work schedule. Andreas is used to homemade food. She would chide when Isabelle came home late from work. You have to feed your man on time, or he'll look for someone else to feed him. Andres didn't defend his wife. When he was with his mother, he seemed to become a different person, submissive, spineless, ready to agree with every word she said. When Valeria finally returned from her spiritual journey, Carmen Dolores reluctantly moved back to her apartment. But the fragile balance in Isabelle and Andres' family had already been disturbed. They fought more often and grew distant from each other. The crisis arrived in their third year of marriage. Andres' app, in which he had invested not only his soul but also significant funds, including money borrowed from Isabelle, failed. A major investor pulled out at the last minute, and competitors released a similar product ahead of him. "I lost everything," he said, sitting at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey. 3 years of work, all the investments, all in vain. Isabelle tried to support her husband, reassuring him that it wasn't the end of the world, that he was talented and would definitely come up with something new. But Andres seemed to break. He lay on the couch for hours, staring at his phone, refused to look for a new job, and snapped at any suggestions Isabelle made. "You don't understand what it's like to have a failure like this," he said bitterly. "Everything always works out for you. And I'm a failure." Isabelle didn't give up. She searched for job openings that matched his experience and qualifications, arranged interviews, and tried to boost his self-esteem. But Andres failed one interview after another, arriving late, looking uninterested, or making unreasonable salary demands. "This position isn't right for me," he declared after another interview, which Isabelle had arranged through her contacts with difficulty. "I'm not going to work for pennies." "But they offered you a decent salary," she objected. "And it's a good starting position with room for growth." "Don't tell me what to do," he snapped. "I'll decide how to build my career." But he clearly wasn't planning to decide anything. Instead of looking for a job, Andres spent his time meeting friends, playing computer games, or just lying on the couch. The money they had saved for the future was depleting at an alarming rate. Isabelle started noticing that her husband was asking her for loans more often, for gas, meetings with potential partners, or new gadgets supposedly necessary for work. Of course, the debts were never repaid, and then her direct superior returned from maternity leave, and Isabelle was moved back to her old position. This was a hard blow. She had already become accustomed to her higher status and salary. "See, I'm not the only one with problems," Andres remarked with some strange satisfaction. "You got demoted too." "I wasn't demoted," Isabelle countered. "I temporarily took on the role of department head, and everyone knew that. It's normal." But Andres seemed not to hear her. He sank deeper into apathy, often disappearing without a word, returning late. Family life was cracking at the seams. During this time, her mother-in-law began to appear at their home more and more often. She came to support her son in his difficult time, but in reality, she only made things worse, constantly reminding him of his failure while simultaneously blaming Isabelle for everything. "You pressured him too much," she said when Andres left the room. "A man needs space to realize himself, and you with your career. Is this how you build a family?" Isabelle tried not to react to these barbs. She loved her husband, believed in him, and wanted to keep the family together. But with each passing day, hope melted away like the first snow under the spring sun. On their 4th wedding anniversary, Andres didn't come home at all, didn't call, didn't send a message. Isabelle waited for him all evening with dinner prepared and a gift, a pair of expensive cufflinks she had been saving up for months. He showed up in the early morning, drunk, with a hickey on his neck, and didn't even remember the date. That was when she seriously started thinking about divorce, though she hadn't made a decision yet. The hope that everything could still be fixed, that the Andres she had fallen in love with at the Barcelona airport was still somewhere inside this gloomy, constantly dissatisfied person, was still there. Deep down, Isabelle knew she was deceiving herself. She remembered her father's words about the turbulence zone and hoped that their plane would still reach calm skies. But the turbulence continued, and there seemed to be no end in sight. In the 5th year of their marriage, 2 events happened that finally set everything in motion. First, Andres got a job not in the IT field but as a simple sales manager at a company owned by a former classmate. Isabelle was happy, thinking this was the beginning of their way out of the crisis. But the joy was short-lived. 2 months later, Andreas announced that he was fired due to staff reductions. Isabelle later learned from mutual friends that he had actually been fired for consistent lateness and failure to meet sales targets. "This job wasn't for me," he said when he came home the day he was fired. "I'm a creative person, not a salesman." Isabelle kept silent, though inside she was seething with indignation. A creative person hadn't created anything in 2 years except problems for their family. The second event was more positive. Isabelle was promoted to the position of development director at her tourism company. After many years of hard work, she finally received the recognition she had dreamed of. The promotion came with a significant salary increase and new opportunities for professional growth. That evening, Isabelle returned home elated, ready to share the good news with her husband. She hoped that this could be a fresh start for both of them, with her new salary. Andreas could take his time looking for a job and maybe even start a new project. He was sitting in the kitchen, lazily browsing something on his laptop. When Isabelle told him about her promotion, he nodded indifferently. Then, he suddenly perked up. "It's great you got promoted. Mom and sister are moving in with us permanently. Now you'll support everyone," he blurted out, and without waiting for a response, grabbed the car keys. "I'm going to pick them up. They've packed their things." Isabelle froze in shock. In 5 years of marriage, she had learned to forgive and tolerate a lot, but this moment was the last straw. This wasn't just disrespect toward her as a wife. This was a complete disregard for her as a person with her own desires and rights. The words from her grandmother's farewell letter suddenly came to her mind: "This is your home, and only you decide who crosses its threshold." The decision came instantly and was final. As soon as the door closed behind Andreas, Isabelle called a locksmith, then began methodically collecting her husband's things: clothes, shoes, personal items. She carefully packed them into suitcases and bags, which she placed by the door. 3 hours later, a new lock was installed on her apartment, and the old keys no longer worked. Isabelle sat down in an armchair and waited. Inside, there was emptiness, no anger, no resentment, just calm determination and a strange sense of relief, as if she had shed a burdensome weight she had been carrying for too long. They arrived together, Andreas, Carmen Dolores, and Valeria, loaded with bags and boxes. Isabelle heard the key scraping in the lock without turning around. Then came the doorbell. She approached but didn't open the door. "Andreas, this is over," she said calmly through the door. "I'm asking for a divorce. Your things are by the door, pick them up and leave." "What?" Her husband's voice sounded shocked. "Isabella, open up immediately. What kind of joke is this?" "This is no joke. I don't want to be your wife anymore. And I certainly don't want to support you, your mother, and your sister." Behind the door, Carmen Dolores' outraged voice could be heard. "How dare you, ungrateful! My son is the best thing that ever happened to you. Open the door right now." "Donna Carmen, I don't want to talk to you at all," Isabelle cut her off. "You did everything to destroy our family. Congratulations, you succeeded." "Isabella," Andreas' voice now carried a pleading tone. "Let's talk like adults. I understand you're tired. You've had a difficult day." "No, Andreas, I've already made my decision. For 5 years, I tolerated your disrespect, your laziness, your parasitic attitude. I loved you, supported you, believed in you. And you didn't even ask if I want your relatives living with us. You just put me in front of the fact. But it's my family. And what about me? Who am I to you?" There was silence. Then Isabelle heard Valeria's quiet voice. "Andreas, let's go. You see, she's already decided everything." "We're not going anywhere," Carmen Dolores intervened. "This is also our house. Andreas has a right to it." "No, Donna Carmen," Isabelle said firmly. "This apartment is mine. I inherited it from my grandmother. Andreas has no right to it." If you don't leave right now, I will call the police. There was silence again behind the door. Then there was noise. Apparently, Andres started gathering his things. You will regret this, Carmen Dolores threw in one last remark. A man like my Andres doesn't come by with candles. Isabelle didn't respond. She returned to the living room and sank into an armchair, feeling a strange mix of emptiness and relief. Tears streamed down her face, but her soul was calm, as if after a long illness, recovery had come. The divorce was harder than she had expected. Andres, incited by his mother, hired a lawyer and tried to claim part of the apartment, arguing that he had invested money in its renovation and maintenance. But Isabelle had all the documents for both the inheritance and the expenses for the apartment, which she had mostly covered herself. The lawsuit dragged on for 6 months. During this time, Andres tried to come back several times. He came with flowers, swore his love, promised to change. When pleas didn't work, he resorted to threats and manipulation. You'll never find anyone better than me, he said during one of their meetings. Who's going to want you, career woman, with your personality? Isabelle listened silently, not giving in to the provocations. She had already made up her mind and wasn't going to back down. Carmen Dolores also didn't give up trying to influence the situation. She called Isabelle's parents, telling them what an ungrateful daughter and wife she was, sent angry messages, even once ambushed her outside the office. You broke my son's heart, she declared, blocking Isabelle's way to her car. He's suffering, can't sleep at night. Dona Carmen, your son is an adult man who destroyed our marriage with his attitude, Isabelle calmly replied. And I ask you not to follow me, or I'll be forced to call the police. After this incident, her mother-in-law left her alone, but the relationship with Andres continued to remain tense. He alternated between threatening to take all the joint property and begging for another chance. I've changed, Isabella, he said during one of the meetings with the lawyers. I got a job, I moved out of my mom's house, I'm living alone. I'm happy for you, Andres, she answered sincerely. But our marriage is over. In the end, the court ruled in her favor. The divorce was finalized. The apartment remained entirely hers. Andres was given the car they had bought during the marriage and part of the household appliances. After the divorce, Isabelle didn't rush into new relationships. She focused on work, rebuilding her social circle, which had narrowed significantly over the years of marriage, and finding a new balance in her life. The first few months were difficult. She had gotten used to not sleeping alone, to cooking for two, to sharing everyday joys and worries with someone. Now she had to learn to live differently. You'll get through this, daughter, her father said when she visited her parents after the final court session. You're strong, like all the Monteros. And she managed, day by day, step by step. She started traveling again, now not just for work but for herself. She made new acquaintances, reconnected with old friends she had drifted apart from during the marriage. Her career flourished, she was promoted to Director of International Development, and now she was overseeing the opening of new tourism sectors for the company. The work required frequent business trips, meetings with partners, and immersion in different cultures. Isabelle enjoyed it, the freedom of movement, new experiences, and the sense of competence and demand. A year after the divorce, Carmen Dolores passed away from a heart attack. Isabelle, after some hesitation, went to the funeral. Not out of a sense of obligation to her former mother-in-law, but out of respect for the good feelings that once connected her to Andres. He looked older, haggard, but held himself with dignity. After the ceremony, he approached her. Thank you for coming. Mom loved me in her own way, but that love didn't always benefit me. Isabelle nodded silently. She didn't feel any schadenfreude or special sympathy, just quiet sadness for what could have been but never was. I've thought a lot about us, Isabella, Andres continued. You were right then. I didn't respect you, I didn't value you. Mom always controlled me too much, and I allowed it. I think you've changed, Andres, she replied. And I sincerely wish you happiness. With that, they parted ways, this time for good. From mutual acquaintances, Isabelle later learned that Andreas had finally pulled himself together, found a job at an IT company, and started slowly paying off his debts, including the ones to her. Valeria married a foreigner and moved to Australia. Isabelle didn't rush into new relationships. There was a brief romance with a colleague from the Portuguese office, a few dates with different men, but nothing serious. She enjoyed the freedom she had gained, the ability to make decisions without looking back at others' opinions, and to live life on her own terms. At 39, she realized she no longer wanted to postpone motherhood. After carefully weighing everything, she decided on artificial insemination. For her, it was a conscious, adult choice. She wanted a child, felt strong and loving enough to raise one on her own, and didn't want to tie herself to a relationship just to create a complete family. Her pregnancy went smoothly, although doctors had warned of possible complications due to her age. When she told her parents about her decision, they supported her. "You'll be an excellent mother," said Elena Sergio. "And we'll always be close to help." Victor Alexander was more reserved but also approved of his daughter's choice. "I'm proud of you, Isabelita. You make decisions and take responsibility for them, that's what matters." Sophia was born at the end of December. A strong, healthy girl with gray eyes like her mother's and dimples on her cheeks. Isabelle named her after her grandmother, Alexandra Pavla, who always said that her second name was Sophia. Motherhood changed Isabelle. She became gentler, calmer, and learned to enjoy the small things she hadn't noticed before. She didn't leave her job, switching to remote work during her maternity leave. Later, she hired a nanny and returned to the office, but with a different attitude toward her career. Now she valued the balance between work and personal life more, and learned to turn down projects that required too much time and energy. When Sophia turned 3, a new man appeared in Isabelle's life, Michael, an architect she met at a contemporary art exhibition. Calm, grounded, with a soft sense of humor and a deep perspective on life, he didn't try to impress or act passionate. Their relationship developed slowly, without rush. They got to know each other, adapted to each other's quirks and habits, and learned to respect boundaries. Michael accepted Sophia without trying to replace her father but became a true friend and mentor. The little girl grew attached to him, sensing his genuine interest and care. 2 years into their life together, they got married in an intimate ceremony without extravagant celebrations. Now, in the spacious apartment near Retiro, 2 voices, male and female, could be heard, joined by a third, a child's, bright and joyful. Sometimes, while putting her daughter to bed, Isabelle thought about her life path, twisted, with its ups and downs, with unexpected turns. She didn't regret anything, neither her marriage to Andreas, nor the divorce, nor the years of solitude. Every stage had been important. Each one had shaped her into who she was now, a woman who knew her worth and her decisions, capable of standing her ground while remaining open to the world. She remembered her grandmother's words from her farewell letter, "This is your home, and only you decide who crosses its threshold." Now she understood the deeper meaning of those words. It wasn't just about physical space, but about the inner world, the heart, and the soul. And Isabelle was grateful to her grandmother for this lesson, for the strength passed down through generations, for the ability to change locks not just on doors, but in life.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.